Lynchburg City School Board work session is now called to order. Everybody please stand for the pledge of the flag. You have an agenda in front of you. Are there any amendments or additions? We have one addition under comments. Dr. Copeland is going to share with us the safe school disc that we have to review. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Nilles. Dr. Coleman, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. The first item on our work session agenda is the Equity Task Force presentation. Thank you for being here and for doing this, Dr. Edwards.
Sure, and Equity Task Force has been meeting a couple times over the course of last year and into the summer, and they have put together a presentation of recommendations for you, similar to the special ed school health advisory committees that have also come before the board. And I am pleased to welcome our spokespeople tonight, Mr. Reason Chandler and Ms. Jennifer Woofter, who are going to come up and present to us tonight. So welcome, Mr. Chandler.
Good afternoon. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be able to stand before you this evening on behalf of and as a representative of the Equity Task Force, as well as our community at large, our children, parents, fathers, uncles, aunts. And we have for you 3 proposals that we, as the Equity Task Force, diligently discussed and worked together. We did breakout group sessions, and we came to a consensus. And we believe that in the name of equity, it's important that we address some of the changes that need to be made because of the community that is affected by these policies. I'm sure you've already received the research material and you've had an opportunity to study it, and you will find that last year about 34 people were denied the opportunity to serve as volunteers in our schools for the reason of having a felony on their record. The majority of those individuals were African American, and the majority of them were males. We've also found that there are citizens in our community that have worked diligently after making mistakes in the past to restore their citizenship. They have the right to vote. They have retrieved the right to carry a firearm. They have retrieved the right to the privilege to drive, and yet they do not have the opportunity to serve as a volunteer or to volunteer at the school that their child or niece or nephew attend. And so we thought it would be an equity issue, or in our best interest of equity, to find a way to change this, because treating any first-class citizen as a second-class citizen is not equity. A family that's healing, a family that's restoring relationships, they need this component, they need this part of their life as well, because they are healing, and they want to grow and they want to move forward. And so we also, we've decided, or we offer these proposals. The recommendations of the Equity Task Force review the current policy that restricts former felons for serving as volunteers and consider it a barrier to equity in the school system. The Equity Task Force recommends that the Lynchburg School Board revise the policy using these options. Completely remove any consideration of a person's former conviction record when revising or reviewing the volunteer application. If a person has served their full sentence, they should be restored their full rights as a citizen in our community. Number two, the second option is, oh wow, okay, thank you.
Sorry, it's coming.
Yeah.
We're just gonna match what you're saying.
I appreciate that, yeah. And please don't be offended if I say I cannot see that. As long as everyone else can, I think we're going to be okay, right? Number two is there should be no restrictions for nonviolent offenders when reviewing a volunteer application. In addition to that, and if there is a violent offense, that it should be viewed case by case. And of course, number three is LCS administration will develop a consistent process to evaluate allowing volunteers in the schools on a case-by-case basis, and will consider each applicant with a 60-day time limit or timeline, using the following factors before granting approval. These are the recommendations of the Equity Task Force, and I'm not alone. And I would like to have the Equity Task Force that work with us to please stand so that you will see. Thank you. Thank you very much. So it is essential in the name of equity that we talk about the elephant in the room. And we understand that in the past there were concerns, and there should be concerns, beyond a shadow of a doubt. But we want to make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity. Everyone that is involved in this relationship and even in this process has a fair opportunity to serve and to hopefully be a part of the community again, which is something that I'm sure our parents or our citizens or our fellow citizens desire to do, or they wouldn't apply. They wouldn't come to our schools and attend various functions at our schools if they did not want to be a part of that community. And so we believe as Equity Task Force that these recommendations are something that we would like for you to consider.
It might be helpful to just go back a couple slides. Since
Okay.
there are so many people in the audience who may not know what the Equity Task Force was charged for. If you go back just.
Would you like to be in charge?
Sure, Jennifer. Please help me out.
Yes.
Marvelous. Oops. So the Equity Task Force is appointed to examine and make recommendations to the school board around diversity and equitable practices in 6 areas. That covers staff, students, training, engagement and involvement, cultural diversity, access, and barriers. Over the last year, we've met at least 6 times. I think it's closer to 8 because we had a couple subgroup meetings. And there have been more than a dozen different equity issues raised. But a couple months ago, we decided, let's put that aside and let's focus on the big one, the one that we feel has the most urgency. is the most pressing and has the most potential to make immediate impact. And so as a result, we will be coming back to you in the coming school year with other issues, but what we really want to focus on is this volunteer policy. And what we found is that there's really good alignment between these concerns about the volunteer policy and the role of the Equity Task Force. So specifically, the volunteer policy impacts 4 key areas. Students. Do students have the opportunity to see their loved ones volunteering in their school? Do they get to see people who look like them in the school taking an active volunteer role in their education, in engagement and involvement? If we are excluding certain individuals from full participation and engagement, that impacts our children's learning environment. For cultural diversity, right now we have a volunteer base that does not currently represent the full range of our community. And then of course, access and barriers. Does this policy put up unnecessary barriers for full volunteer participation? So with that, we took some time diving more specifically into the volunteer policy. And the highlighted text there is the one that we really are focused on. Anyone convicted of a felony offense will be disqualified from volunteer activity. Anyone convicted of a misdemeanor may be disqualified depending upon the nature of the offense and or the volunteer activity. So one thing that's really important that we want to make sure we're all on the same page here is the distinction between visitor and volunteer. Right now, if you have a conviction for a felony in the past that you have made full restitution, you are allowed to come in and read to the class. You can come in and have lunch with your student. The idea is that you are welcome to come in and be part of the experience, but you move from a visitor category to a volunteer category when you have a supervisory role over someone else's child. So that is if you're coaching or assistant coaching, and maybe you have kids sort of off in the field where you have sort of an immediate supervisory role. If you are chaperoning a group of children, transporting them in your vehicle, those would be cases that would fall under this volunteer category. We have some background information that's been presented multiple times. In fact, I was at a school board meeting, one of these, when a lot of this data was presented, so I won't belabor it, but what we found, as Mr. Chandler said, is that we have 34 individuals just this past year who were denied the opportunity to volunteer. That is only those who applied and were denied. That does not count an unknown number of people who did not apply to begin with because the policy was in place. There were some previous concerns about liability and insurance, but what you can see from the slide is that it does seem like there is no clear insurance problem, that is not a concern. The state of Virginia requirements in tracking, the state does not track this level of information. They really suggest that your school your school system do what's best for the school system. We looked at a number of other Virginia school districts as well and found a number of them, all the ones that we contacted did not automatically exclude those with a prior criminal conviction. All of this information, I would be remiss in not crediting where credit is due. Virginia organizing has been tremendously impactful here in bringing all of this data together. So where does the Equity Task Force stand? We come to the table with 3 findings. Number 1, that our students are best served with a diverse and engaged volunteer population that reflects the diversity of our students. Second, that the current volunteer policy prevents an inclusive learning environment by disproportionately restricting and eliminating potential volunteer population. And third, there is no question that this current policy is disproportionately impacting our African American community. Everyone on the task force agrees the policy is too restrictive, and we are asking the school board to review it and update it. Clearly, I think one of the frustrations that we have heard from people, or sort of the back and forth, is that this has been pending for a long time. We would like to see some kind of resolution. I think we come with a perspective on what that resolution should be, but either way, we think that there needs to be a meaningful decision made. So the 3 options that Mr. Chandler went over, again, you could keep the policy the same. That is not our recommendation. The second is that you make a distinction between nonviolent and violent felony convictions. And we remove the blanket prohibition if you have a nonviolent felony conviction. And for those with a violent felony conviction, it goes to a case-by-case review. The third option, which is less restrictive, is to remove any consideration so that there is no blanket prohibition based on your prior conviction record when reviewing a volunteer application. So let's talk about, like, what does that mean? So essentially, right now, if you have a felony conviction at all, you are prohibited from day one. There is no review. That's it. It's an open and shut case. On the right side, if we have full rights restoration, we say you have paid your debt to society, you have become a restored citizen, you are treated equally to any other person trying to volunteer in the school system. And the middle ground, that option A, is that in between, where if you have a nonviolent felony conviction, you're good to go, we'll move forward. If it's a violent felony conviction, you would get a case-by-case review. One important thing here that we want to say is the current policy allows for the LCS system to, at their discretion, restrict the ability of volunteers to do specific volunteer tasks. So, for example, if you were convicted of a DUI, maybe you would say, okay, you can come coach a softball game, but you can't drive children in your car to something. Or if you had a history of check fraud, maybe we would say, yes, come chaperone the thing, but you can't be the treasurer for the parent-teacher organization. There is that discretion already built in. What we're talking about is there a blanket, categorical allowance or prohibition for felony convictions? So we have some examples for discussion, and we can certainly go back to those if you'd like to see them. It always helps me to sort of think through specific things. Would this be allowed? Would it not? But I think across the board, so sort of we're recommending that we either loosen the policy a lot or loosen it a little bit. But either way, we definitely all agree that there needs to be a consistent process developed by the administration to review this so that people aren't coming back to the school board saying, change the policy, that there is a process for that case-by-case review. And that process needs to be time-bound so that parents and family members and community members aren't waiting indefinitely as that process rolls out. And okay, so that's the background. I'm happy to turn it back over to my co-presenter.
Don't move, stay here.
Oh.
Thank you for coming before us and putting so much time and effort into getting us to this place. I know it has not been easy. I know that there have been some good discussions, but we do appreciate your commitment to the Equity Task Force and for bringing this back to us for us to discuss. Are there any questions, Dr. Gupta? And we'll take names.
I really
everybody.
appreciate all your work. I fully agree with you. It's been long-standing. A decision needs to be made. So where does the Equity Task Force stand on sex offenders who are on Virginia Sex Registry? I didn't see any of your examples citing to what's your recommendation on that?
Yeah, so that was actually a topic that came up at a couple different meetings, and in the end of the day, what we realized is part of the restrictions, if you have a sex-based offense, if you go on a registry, already includes those prohibitions, that you're not allowed within X number of feet of a school, or you're not allowed to be in situations where you're supervising children. We think that the actual conviction component of that deals with it, but that would be another thing that if we wanted on a case-by-case basis to identify that if there was and not just sex-based offenses, but a crime against a child that wasn't sex-based, you might also include that as a case-by-case or as a specific categorical restriction. I think what we're saying is that across the board, we just don't want prior felony convictions as a whole blocked.
So, but I'm hearing you right, you want to exclude them, any child molestation, child abuse.
Our understanding is any of those convictions, part of the release process, comes with already restrictions that if you go on a sex offender registry, you are already precluded. That you could certainly add it to the policy, but we believe it would be redundant.
So they will be not considered even on case-by-case basis.
So I'd just like to thank you all for doing this and thank the Equity Task Force for the effort. This was a huge effort to put this all together, and I know it was under the auspices of Dr. Edwards and Ethel Reeves, and it really was terrific. As we all know, this topic has been discussed many times, going back to like 2015. And I want to point out one time, which was in March of 2017, when Dr. Coleman and I were actually on the Equity Task Force, and I stood where you were standing with some people in the audience tonight, like Reverend Paul Keyes and Danny McCain and Eugene Tweedy, who stood up there and said similar things. And we only had 3 minutes, but we didn't have a nice presentation, so you did much better. But the two things we really asked for. One is that the board consider changing the policy on a case-by-case basis, that it not be a blanket. You cannot do it for a felony. And the other thing is the fact that the safety of students and staff is the utmost importance of volunteer applicants to allow, and that all volunteers should be appropriately vetted and the process be continually monitored, which you've also pointed out. So you have said in a much nicer way what we said several years ago. As you all know, for a variety of reasons, we got far enough at that point where the board actually supported it, but then things changed, and we're all familiar with that history. Now I sit here as a board member on the other side of that podium looking at the policy. And as the discussion has gone over the last 2 years, I've really had 3 concerns as a board member looking at it. One is that when we reviewed this before and the administration reviewed it before, they could not find any other district that allowed individuals with felony convictions to volunteer. And I personally called multiple districts in the state. I called North Carolina. I called various places, and either couldn't get the information or found out there was not that. As has been pointed out in your presentation, that has changed. So over the last several months, I have called several of the districts that you have on your list, for example, Charlottesville and Albemarle County, which do not ask about felony convictions. They do not do a background check. All of these districts do a screening for sexual offender registry. Everyone does that, and as you've pointed out, if you are a sexual offender, you are not allowed to come into the school. So everyone does that, so that part is taken care of. Danville and Nelson County both have in their policy that you have to report a felony, but it's a case-by-case basis as far as what happens with that. And as we all know, a lot of districts like Richmond and Roanoke have similar policies to ours. But the point that I was reassured by was the fact that there are other districts, that some of which don't even ask, and other ones do it on a case-by-case basis. The other point that was important to me as a board member was the whole liability insurance piece, because again, as we all know, something happened with that to sidetrack this effort. So when I called these districts, I also asked each of them, who is your liability insurance carrier, and has this been a problem? And I pretty universally got the same approach from all of them, which is that, why do you ask? You know, we don't present our policies to our liability insurance carrier. It's not been an issue, but they did tell me who they were. They were all different, but they did not feel that that was a major issue from their point of view, including Albemarle and Charlottesville, who have no restriction. And then the third piece that I was also sort of concerned about is that that if we decide to make a change, if the board considers it on a case-by-case basis, that we have to be really clear about what those parameters are, and that they have to be equitable, and they have to be uniformly enforced across all schools in our system to make sure that it's really fair. So, you know, personally, those 3 points I'm very comfortable with. We are not the first district to consider this. Other districts have been doing it for a number of years. And as you've said, from as best we can tell, from a liability insurance practice point, it shouldn't be a major issue. The devil is in the details for all those things, but I think you all have done a great job in looking at that. So in conclusion from my statements, I'm glad that we're having this discussion again. I'm glad it's finally come up because it's been going on since 2015. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Mr. Robert Flood, who has been bringing this to the attention for more than probably that period of time. I appreciate what Equity Task Force has done to bring all this forward and have this great discussion. And I hope that there'll be a final recommendation of the board to change the policy from banning all volunteers with a felony to deciding on a case-by-case basis with clear parameters how we can enforce it so that all members of our community may participate in the education and success of our children, as you pointed out. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your time, and thank you, Ms. Morrison, for letting me ramble on.
If I might, we want to be mindful that in that position, we are still allowing for certain levels of discrimination, and that's what we want to eliminate. We want to eliminate the very intent to discriminate. We want our community to feel like they are a part, not set apart, but as one unit. And if we tread this lightly and we don't take in consideration that we're still allowing for that, we cannot predict what's going to happen in the future. I don't care how many policies we write or how we feel like we're protecting our community by policies. We cannot predict the future. So it's probably better that we empower our community because one of the things that I notice about the difference between the handbook that the public school issues and the handbook that LCA issues is this. Our handbook is full of restrictions. LCA's handbook is full of expectations. And so I believe that if we express that because you are now a citizen, these are the expectations, I think that we would probably fare better on the side of equity than still allowing a crack in the door. That door needs to be closed. If it's nonviolent, why do they still have to sit back and be anxious about whether or not they're going to be allowed to serve? If they've served their time, if they've met all the demands of the courts, if they've paid their fines, if they are wanting to interact with their families and heal their families, they should be allowed to do that without having to worry about, okay, I have a felony, so it's still going to be case by case, and it's like we're going right back to square one. And so the Equity Task Force, the consensus is that if it's nonviolent, then why put them through that? Why make them feel like they have to go before a parole board again and again and again when they just want to get on with their life? They just want to move forward. They want to be a part of the community. They want to feel like that they are contributing they are a part of the equity that's found in their community, in their families, as well as in their schools. And so that is something that we hope that you guys would really consider, closing that door. I understand that we have a responsibility to protect our children and protect our families, but our main role is to serve and to empower. And so we should really consider how can we do that? How can we empower our community? Even though they've made mistakes, even though they might be broken, even though they're coming from different places, we still have a responsibility to empower them and make them feel like, yes, we need you.
Madam Chair, I do not want to be loquacious, and so if there's another board member who wants to say something, I would yield. But when I have something to say, it's going to take me at least 2 or 3 minutes to say it. So I'll let you decide when you want to call on me.
Dr. Coleman, you have the floor. And I'm timing you. Get started now.
Yes, ma'am. To the point that was just stated, I think, by Reverend Chandler, on page 5 of the document that you all disseminated to us as a board, compliments certainly to all of you in your preparation, where it talks about the visitor and volunteer designations or distinction, I should say. I first want to state just my personal thought about the usage of the phrase or phraseology, former felons. I would prefer returned citizens. And so then that places axiologically a value on every human being from the start. Now, on the next page, which is page 6, where you have background information, I would just like to add to the fine research of Dr. Brennan that I checked with the chair of the Martinsville School Board today, and they also are case by case. I would like to go on record that there is a March the 7th, 2017 article in the News in Advance, an April the 4th, 2017 article in the News in Advance, and an April the 19th article in the News in Advance 2017, all of which indicate my support for an adjustment in this policy then, and my position has not changed. I believe that we ought to, according to the wisdom of the 9 good, sound, powerful minds we have on this board, come up with something that will allow returned citizens to be just that, citizens. Now, a lot of hard work previously has gone into this matter, and I thank my colleague Bob Brennan for making sure that there is the research available on how the committee then deliberated, how the decision was made in terms of the policy and regulations that never got voted on, but are very meticulous in terms of giving the superintendent the responsibility, once we determine whatever these adjustments may be, to make those calls as to who would be able to serve and not serve within the agreed upon parameters. And all of that is available for us. I have also looked at the efficiency study that Larry Massey put out, in which he talks about, back in 2012, a need for behavior management. And what better way to assist behavior management than after we have properly vetted individuals to have those in front of students who can best help them to be all they can be and find creativity in the class. All right, I'm almost finished. Now, Madam Chair, I've looked at this matter, and I want to be clear. We do not want to make it unduly difficult, and I repeat, we do not want to make it unduly difficult for persons to volunteer. But our concern is for the children. And so whatever we are coming up with, it's all about the kids and their safety. Now, having thought this, I thought about it. I've put a lot of thought on this. And I've tried to find some evidence-based research, Dr. Edwards, that would help us to appreciate 20 years waiting, 15 years waiting, 10 years waiting, 5 years waiting. And I could find no clear evidence-based research as to how long a person needs to wait. So any number appears to me to be arbitrary. Now, if that in fact is the case, then there's got to be some sound reason somewhere. And so I called Tamara Reynolds, who is the coordinator for volunteerism for Parks and Rec, and have their document that the city uses for who can volunteer with Parks and Rec. Well, they have 5 years for nonviolent persons, and it is clearly delineated, and then they have 10 years for violent individuals. So I looked at that and I thought about that. And I've heard some of you come before us and talk a number of times about this whole notion of 15 years. Previously, we were discussing that, then the board 8-1 did 5 years, and persons have had thoughts about that. So I conclude with this. What would happen if we were to say something to the effect of case by case for both nonviolent and violent, as far as I'm concerned, but case by case, 5 years, unless a person is able to demonstrate the following: 1 year of continuous employment. You have a physical disability and unable to work. But the Martinsville chair stated that they had someone with a felony, allowed them to volunteer, and 3 days after they volunteered, they got a felony on something else. Just want us to think. So 1 year of continuous employment, physical disability, and unable to work, some connection with a community or faith-based organization where they have demonstrated volunteerism of some kind somewhere else, and 3 letters of reference that would put somebody's name on the line for the applicant, and maybe some basic online training. Maybe it could take place much earlier than 5 years. And so I conclude by saying I support a policy adjustment to allow nonviolent individuals, returned citizens, to be able to help properly vetted under whatever structure it is going to be. And I yield to the wisdom of the entire body on those who are violent categories, as long as they wouldn't be barrier crimes, Dr. Atul Gupta, that have already been identified.
Anyone else? Dr. Gupta?
I had an unusual request. I wanted to hear from 2 members of the committee, see if they can throw some wisdom. Can I request that? I
The
don't know.
committee?
No, the community out
Well,
there.
let's deal with the task force.
I don't know if they're part of the task force or not.
The task force is the presentation tonight.
Madam Chair, I yield to your wisdom. But in this work session setting, I think that there may be some other organizations that are here that would like to maybe give a reflection. I don't know if they're going to have an opportunity, and you leading, is there going to be any opportunity for us to respond to any questions that persons may have?
What do you want to do? Dr. Gupta, if you want to ask your questions.
I wanted to, there are 2 members I respect, Mr. McCain and Mayor Hutcherson. I wanted to hear from them what their thoughts on this policy.
If they want to.
Very good.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Well, we started back several years ago trying to do this, and I'm in full support. I think it's a must. I think our children need it. I think the Lynchburg school system need this to happen. When we look at our children, you know, even today, I don't know about today, but last year, black male teachers, I think was around 3%. Black teachers as a whole was around 13%. Our children don't see us. It's a must that we have the opportunity to visit our schools and to support our school system. And yes, I'm in full support of this. And I wish that we had tacked on a date for the school board to respond, because it's been dragged on too long. And so hopefully after tonight, you have heard this great statement on what we need and how we support it. And I hope you make a decision right away so that these people can move on with their lives and help our young people.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Dr. Gupta, for mentioning the fact. I represent the Lynchburg branch of the NAACP. And we fully support changes that the Equity Task Force has brought before the board tonight. I came to this meeting mad. We've got other problems, as our superintendent knows, or you know, that affect our children. And it bothered me that I had to come angry because of something that happened to a child that I'm in charge of, who got off her bus upset. All of us make mistakes. You made them. I've certainly made them. But I do know this. Redemption is something that goes an awful long way toward making a community in which we all live a better place. At one point, and I'm going to sit down, but at one point we talked about the insurance issue. If we're doing things by a case-to-case basis, then I'm sure there are felons or former felons, returning citizens, who won't mind holding harmless the school system as it relates to insurance. Holding harmless. It should never be a burden on any of you or of any of our employees in the Lynchburg City School System if returning citizens are given the opportunity to work, to serve, to volunteer in our schools. We in the NAACP applaud what the Equity Task Force has done, and we fully support it. Thank you.
Good evening. A number of you I've had the privilege of working with over time. I was in the first graduating class of Heritage High School when Sandusky was made a high school for 1 year while they finished up on the building. Now all three of my children have graduated and going on. My oldest child, 32, she's a couple of years married. She's working on her doctoral. I have a daughter that just graduated from Heritage. She's in her second year at LU. She's 19, business administration. I have a son who has IEP and other things because he had some challenges in his early years, and because he had the wraparound services that Mrs. Morrison and others provided. Now he's a computer technician. We've also, as a faith-based ministry and also as a community outreach center that will be celebrating 25 years, we've been privileged to be able to work with the Annie Casey Foundation and with the Lynchburg City Schools in coming up with strategic ideas as to how we can work with at-risk kids. One of the most phenomenal successes was working with the juvenile alternative program and kids who were going to alternative school over the number of years, who on terrible tracks, one child in particular dropped out of school in the 10th grade because they thought they couldn't do anything else for him. He went to Millamont under our program and got his, first he went to got his GED, then went to Millamont and got his pharmaceutical license, and now he's a supervisory manager for Pacific Life downtown. And there are a number of cases like that. With respect to the volunteer program, I just wanted to speak to what does success look like for all of those parents, or a number of them, or a representation of them, that are turned away by the school board or by LCS. They come to us as an alternative program under certain restrictions and responsibilities and accountability. Those that are reconciled, those who may have felony records, but they've gone on to become doctors and nurses and respectable persons in society, and raise children who have acquired degrees and respected occupations and what have you, outside of the school system, because the school system had a policy there that said it doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, it doesn't matter if you're a doctor, it doesn't matter where you serve outside of this system, because you have this situation and we don't have a policy to address it. You cannot participate in your children. You have to do it outside. And so they're going on. I'm telling you, I'm giving you a real cases. They are going on and partnering with us in our before and after school programming, and working with our daycare kids in over 15 years. They've gone on to raise their children and work with wraparounds and other resources and work with teachers off-site and retired teachers and become very proficient. And so I'm saying to you, to be very optimistic. As I was coming in here, and I'm going to say this and I'll sit down, I was talking to a few that have been veterans in this area who have served community well. If I mention their name, most of us would know who they were. They were a little frustrated. They said, what do we expect? And we said, that with this kind of presentation, with the kind of simplicity that we present to you, I am deeply optimistic that we're going to come away with something that we can feel like the last 25, 30 years or more that we've served voluntarily in this respect. We can expect something that everybody can appreciate and build on. Thank you.
Ms. Evans?
I do recognize that our main responsibility is children's safety, and I get that. But I absolutely believe in second chances, and I absolutely believe it's time to change how we're doing things and relook at it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Butcher?
And I agree with you that it affects our minority community in town, and it is time to change the policy.
Anyone?
The time has come.
Anyone else? Mr. Harvey?
As the new school board member, the way I tackle these types of issues is to ask members of the community. I have talked with principals, I've talked with educators, I've talked with parents, I've talked with teachers, I've talked with just members of our community, citizens. And the resounding opinion is that this policy does need to change. And I agree that this policy does need to change. But for me, it's the devil is always in the details. And I appreciate what Dr. Coleman mentioned, and I would be in full support, and I completely understand what Reverend Chandler said about not closing the door on anyone and allowing for discrimination to exist in any form. But I do believe that for the safety of our children, I do believe that we need to have a review process for all returned citizens that apply for the opportunity to volunteer in our schools. We, as a school board, first and foremost, have the responsibility to our students, our faculty, and our staff, and our teachers. I do agree that our volunteers bring so much to our community, specifically ones that do have life challenges that we all can learn from. And I think that's a key teaching element that we have, but we also have that responsibility to our students, to the safety of our students, and safety in our schools. And so I would encourage, I would be all for changing this policy, but I do believe that we have to get the details right, and I would be in support of a review process. And I think that at one point there will need to be further discussion on that review process.
Bob?
I'll be brief this time, but I want to make 2 points, 2 additional points. One is that you all pointed out, and I want to reemphasize, that Lynchburg City Schools has gone out of their way to identify that there's a difference between visitors and volunteers. And we really want people to know that they can help in the schools. They can come to work with their children after school events, lunch, field trips, as long as they're not supervising other people. That is an important piece. The other piece of the current policy, which is not mentioned very much, but I think we all need to be aware of too, and this is a quote from that, is that at no time will the volunteer be alone with a student or at a school-related event. There must always be an adult staff member present when the volunteer is working with children. A volunteer will never be a substitute for a staff member. So currently in our system, volunteers are supervised by staff members. They cannot be alone. Just to let everybody know, we're still, safety for our children is the most important thing, and that's in our policy already, and will continue to be there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if you would allow someone to respond to my question, maybe in 30 seconds, 45 seconds, I don't know, but that'll be your call. But I think my colleague, who is just showing his brilliance on our board already, Brother Harvey, for what you stated about looking at what people stated. I do want to remind us that when an extensive survey was done back in 2017, those results were overwhelmingly so for us to adjust the policy back in 2017. But the question that I have, you all did some research where you were suggesting that there were 34 people that, I think Jennifer, you stated that were denied, and they're African American, mostly male. And I just want y'all to think about it. What response do you have? Because I'm really wrestling with this time factor, you know, because right in with no opportunity to really show and prove yourself, I don't know. But what I'm saying is this: if we can get men, when we don't often see men in our schools, who can really help. We have a flawed criminal justice system, in my opinion, that has the opportunity to create many challenges. What do you really think about that timepiece? I know you're thinking about it because you've given us a well thought out presentation about putting a male out in front of kids so that we can help people. Maybe it'll be a correlation to help with behavior and ultimately student achievement and performance. But what do you think? Are you really thinking that, bam, put them out there with no opportunity to demonstrate any type of stability, community stability, and all of those kind of things?
I believe that has already been demonstrated by those who have had to deal with the rigorous details of being under a parole officer. I don't know if anybody's familiar with what that's like, but they already have a timeline. They already have deadlines that they have to meet. They already have meetings. They already have to show self-control and discipline in not being involved in misbehavior or even drug and alcohol. Prior to becoming the citizen, they've already gone through this kind of testing. And for those who have passed the test, they've already made up their mind that is more beneficial to them and their families that they be a first-class citizen and that they follow the rules and the guidelines. They've learned from their mistakes. And so to put them through that yet again, I still say that you're treating them as if they're second-class citizens when the judges and the parole officers have said you're free. You've done all we asked you to do. So why are we requiring them to do even more? I believe we have to trust each other. We have to trust our justice system. We have to trust those that we have put into place to make sure that these people are reconciled, that these citizens of my sisters and brothers have been reconciled and they've saw the error in their ways, and now they've decided that they want to live life according to the guidelines and the rules that everyone else has to live by. There are those of us who have done things that we didn't get caught doing. And nobody knows but us and God. And because we got a second chance, we have started doing the things that's required of us. We become responsible. We become role models. And yes, it is very important to our African American young men to see black men like myself to show up in school on the field trips or just come to an event and just cheer them on. But it's even more essential that I get involved in their life and create a relationship with them. Become somebody that they can come to if they need advice. Yes. Come to show them how to tie a tie, or how to wear a suit, or how to address their girlfriends or their wives-to-be, hopefully. They need to see us. They need to be involved in our everyday life. So to make them feel less than that, that's saying that we don't trust the system that we've already required them to go through. Because we're putting them through yet another gauntlet of things that they have to do to prove that they've learned their lesson. And so my answer would be, yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that at number one, if they come forward and they volunteer, yes, we hold them accountable. And we give them the opportunity. there are already safety mechanisms that's already in place, like the staff members and our administration, like you, like Dr. Gupta just said, that supervises and watches over them. So we have, I think, what they call redundancy in the Navy. We already have this redundancy in place where there are people in place that's watching the people that are watching the people. We find out that these men and these women are willing to step out or step up to volunteer to help us. Let's step up beside them. Let's lock arms with them. Let's show them that, you know what? We have confidence in you. We believe that you want to be a part of this community and that you're going to do the right thing. We believe that because you have children, you don't want anyone to mistreat your children. You're not going to mistreat anybody else's children. And that, I believe, is the thing that strengthens our community. That is the thing that will demonstrate and give us the most equity from our communities. That's my response. If there's anybody else who would like to respond to that.
I just want to make one quick comment. No, really. I just want you to put this down for thought because this had come up with ours. You have some children who never heard of their parents or anybody having felons, and they're achievers and they're involved in the community, and they don't know why their parents are not volunteering. They never saw it. They were born into a family where the parents served, reconciled, and have been reinstated, and now they got new children that have come up, and within those 18 years, they never saw their parents do anything, but it's on their record, and so they're always wondering, how come mom and dad can't participate? And it's a secret. So I just wanted to put that up there for thought. Okay.
Yes.
Good evening. I'm Reverend Gerard Hutchinson, representing Amazing Grace Outreach Church at this particular venue. The state of Virginia has a vetting process that's been in place for several years, of 3 years, for restoration of rights. And we've been working with a lot of men and women in getting their rights restored, where they can vote, they can be public notary, and they can serve on a jury. And I don't see why we would need to increase that vetting process. It's accepted by the state of Virginia. And so many men and women that I talk to, some young and some not so young, who have gotten their rights back, and they said, well, and they'll call me and let me know, I got my rights back, and now I'm getting ready to do this, and now I'm getting ready to do that, and something positive. And that's just a further step in enriching that person and enriching our beloved community with the people that we have here. You know, we are our greatest resource, and when we can cultivate and enhance that resource, I think we are doing a good job. I appreciate your time.
We're going to need to make a decision of where we go from here. 2 more comments, but we need to move on with where we're going with the process.
I'm going to be brief.
Thank you.
I am that person that everybody's talking about. I am that person that changed their lives. I'm the person that went through being an ex-offender, a recovering addict, gangbanger, you name it, I done it. And I was blessed to change my life in 1989. I had a felon on my record in 1984. And I had a chance to substitute in the school system 3 years with that felony. Because it wasn't a sex offender dealing with kids, anything like that. It was a conspiracy to distribute cocaine charge. And all I done was beat an undercover cop all of $100 because I was strung out on drugs. And they gave me a felony on my record. And that has hindered me for years. But I had went to different places outside of Lynchburg and treated much better. I worked at a Lincoln University in Missouri for 8 years at a university with that felony. I went around every school in Lynchburg when I got my life together and spoke at them schools about drugs, about my life. I came back here 2012. 2014, I went up to EC Glass to volunteer with a friend of mine that I played ball named Billy Huffman. And that's when this started. I couldn't volunteer because I had a felon on my record. And I couldn't believe it. I am that person that we are talking about that changed our lives. That changed his life. I am the person that these little black kids see that do basketball tournaments or have community sessions. They see me and they know who I am. And I don't tell them nothing different when I worked at Lynchburg Detention Home for 6 years with that felony. 6 years for the city of Lynchburg. I went back just recently and worked a year and a half to talk to all those little kids we talking about. And the same way I used to tell them inside, I told them outside, some of them 35, 40 years old. And they come up to me and tell me, thank you. Thank you for help saving my life. Because I've been there. I done it. But I changed my life. I couldn't go and tell them to change their lives until I changed my life. And I see a lot of young men today, 35 and 40, that's doing good. They working. But that felony on their record, you don't even know who the person is, but when you see the box, you check it, you throw the application away before you give him a chance to find out who that person is. Like I said, my days are over. I'm talking about the people coming behind me. Them the ones we need to look at and give a second chance to. Just see what they can do. It's nothing that y'all have found or I have found that when an ex-offender volunteer, he have messed up. Reverend Coleman mentioned something about someone went back out there. You don't have to have a felon to go back out there. A lot of people go under the radar and get in the school system and find out they're sex offenders. I worked at Lynchburg Detention Home where a guy worked over there as a teacher for I don't know how many years. And they seen him looking at some crazy stuff and found out he was a sex offender. Then he went to Charlottesville, got a job up there. But he ended up doing something, I guess, killing himself or something happened to him. But he went under the radar, and he had a clean record. All we asking is just give us a second chance. We need every single person today to help these kids. Every single person. White, black, green, purple, whatever you want to call it. We got to do this. We got enough fools out there now thinking about something crazy to do. Why can't you have somebody recognize them before it come to them? Thank you.
So I'm Kimberly Dyke Harsley, and I think we're going to be a three-part team to make this one short, quick, long comment.
Let's go with the short end of it.
Okay, shorter, yes. Thank you for your ears, your eyes, and your mouthpieces when you come together for the community, but especially for the safety of children, staff, and also the future of the children. I wanted to make sure that the understanding for the difference, I hear a lot of distinction between violent and nonviolent, but there are violent misdemeanors as well. So that cannot just be a dividing line. And also I wanted to talk about, I don't know how many in the room are willing to or want to admit, but we have people here who have turned their lives around, as Flood spoke. But I'd also like to say I hope that Heritage Elementary sees a difference after BB Shavers decided to go outside and create a program, partner with Centra, and do a lot of stuff in the community. James Crossing, before school, after school, with the children, hands-on with the parents. I think he would be a great asset in the school system. But until this is changed, he's working outside. So there's work still being done, but if it can be duplicated in the school, that would kind of tie things together. That's my opinion.
I'd like to thank the school board for taking the opportunity to listen, but I have my famous quote from Judge Greg Mathis. I've been in the streets from jail to lawyer and now a judge. I believe in second chances. I'm at school board. Do y'all believe in second chances? So everybody needs second chances. We might not get caught, but I ask y'all to think about this. It's our children. And as you know, I'm an advocate for children. I volunteer during the school. We also have a mayor who's getting scholarships for elementary school for Thurrington and Yoder Centers, where they can get scholarships in elementary schools. So please allow these men, and as Judge Greg Mathis say, do y'all believe in second chances? Because we do.
The three of us are here on behalf of Virginia Organizing, and I want to make it clear that Virginia Organizing is very clear about this, that we support option C, that there be no consideration of former felonies in accepting volunteers. And the reason for that is, as Kimberly pointed out, it's very difficult to distinguish between a violent and a nonviolent offense. It's not at all clear. The answer is, the devil is in the details. Get rid of the details. Accept any volunteer, without question and without time limit, for all the reasons that have been said. These people have already served their time. They have demonstrated that they are changed people. There are plenty of safeguards built in, as Dr. Brennan pointed out. They would never be alone with a child. There would always be someone else there. My question to you is, what are you afraid of? Will you let your fear of a hypothetical situation cause you to take away the right of a returned citizen to become a full citizen? If you do anything less, you're not doing that. Thank you.
So I am gathering from board comments, and yes, sir. Did you want to?
No, I'm waiting for you to say you're excused.
Not yet. I'm gathering from the board comments and emails or letters that we've been reading that the board is interested and supports revisiting this issue and looking at the volunteer policy and the regulations.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we need to send this to the proper committee that will then look at timelines and language and recommendations from everyone. And then, but it needs to be a full board discussion. Yes.
Madam Chair, I personally want to thank every person for coming. And I want you to also begin to do some research to appreciate what school boards have to do. As a member of the Virginia School Boards Association, there's a lot of education that needs to be done to help communities understand how school boards operate. And we share one common interest without question, that we do not need to fix kids. We have to help each kid find their creativity so that they can succeed in life. And we appreciate you all coming to help us think about this matter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that moves us to school admission policy, JEC-RZ. That's Belle. If anyone wants to leave before we start this would be the time to do it. Yeah, do you want to take we're going to take a brief recess so people can use the bathroom? Yeah.
Hi there, thank you so much.
Please. All right, the next order of business is the school admissions policy. Mrs. Evans?
Okay. I sent everybody the 3 questions we needed to answer tonight
Okay.
about foreign exchange. One being, we let the administration come up with a price to charge the companies that place these children, kind of like a processing fee. Dr. Edwards?
Wait a minute, wait.
I'm sorry, I apologize for interrupting, but can you give a little background behind the policy?
There has been no, they haven't done anything with foreign exchange students. I think there's been a policy there, but nothing was followed.
We do know the history. We received a call from, or some concerns from parents that students were not being allowed, foreign exchange students were not being allowed at our 2 high schools because they had a maximum number. And I said that when I was a principal at Glass, that they had to go through a review and they paid tuition with the visa the company came through. And that was 10 years ago.
Right.
Apparently, since then, they have not been following the policy that we have in place. They have been placing them at homes and allowing them to enroll in Lynchburg City schools and not pay any tuition.
And they is the
The placement company. I'm not sure how, this is an expensive program for these students.
It is.
It's a very expensive program. And part of that program used to be that their tuition was paid through the company to Lynchburg City schools. And that stopped at some point. So when I went to look for the policy, I said, wait a minute, this is what the policy says. So we've not been following it, meaning we, the schools, have not been following it. I'm not sure where the 10 student limit came. I don't know, each school did it differently. When I called people to look into this about what, here's a policy, it's not being followed, why is it not being followed, how have we had 10 years of students? And the policy addressed one type of visa. And these students were coming under a different visa. So there was a loophole. So that's how we got here, because our practice was not, our policy was not what they were practicing.
And then we had a problem with host families being out of district, but their children paid to come to Lynchburg City Schools, so what do we do there? That's one of the questions we have to.
What do we do with the foreign exchange student?
Correct. So my notes from the meetings and understanding is that we're not looking at, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, a tuition being paid by the company. We're looking at more of like a processing fee for everything they do. Once they get the paperwork saying this student, there takes a lot on our end of administration following up, checking with Glass, checking with Heritage, and just staying on top of all that. So they would do some type of fee that we would let them come up with, administration, for a company. Also letting administration be able to stop working with a company if something happened. Having the ability to say, this isn't working well for us with this company, we're not going to use this company, we're going to stay with this company. So that was the second part of giving them the option to be able to do that. And the third part is the out of district. Do we want to say, only people within Lynchburg City School limits can be host families? Or do we want to say children who pay tuition out in the counties can be a host family, but then that foreign exchange student also needs to pay the tuition that a child that would be in Bedford County coming in would pay?
Dr. Simon?
So let me check my understanding, because when I heard what you said, it sounded like those students paid tuition, it was just wrapped up in the fees of the,
That's the way it was.
so technic,
We did not get paid.
That's the problem.
but we used to, correct?
Yes.
So,
I mean-
and we're supposed to, correct?
According to this policy, if they come in on a certain visa.
But yeah, I don't think, from my understanding, that we've had students, had any pay for students in
10 years.
Do these companies disclose how much are they charging from the students to bring them to the United States?
No, I don't know that.
They have rates, but I don't know what it is per individual student.
But do we ask them to disclose us?
And what that money goes towards.
Yes, because they are not paying any, my understanding talking to Brennan was, they're not paying host families anything. And from my understanding of these businesses, that they're pretty lucrative for these companies. So for them not to, not give the tuition, no processing fee, and nothing to the host families, how much money is involved in these transaction or business of bringing the students from foreign countries? They're good resources, good assets,
Right.
good thing for our students, but are we being used by these companies to make money?
Yeah, are they predatory?
Well, I think we had 10 students at Glass last year. 9 stayed for the whole year, 1 stayed for 1 semester. And that was another question about, do they have to come for the whole year? If they come for a semester, can someone come second semester that a parent raised? And then I know we had at least 1 at Heritage High School because he was on the state championship football team. He was the kicker, if I remember correctly. The problem is just what Atul is saying, in my opinion. They're paying a lot of money to come here, and I've heard figures from 12 to 15,000. I looked to see, and I didn't see. Couldn't find it on the websites. And the question is, what does it, if they're not paying the host family, they're not paying school tuition, the citizens of Lynchburg are paying that portion of the schooling. They do count in our average daily membership, and they bring tremendous cultural experience, and they were just delightful students as principal, and they brought a lot to the culture of the school. I don't want to penalize the children, or the students, but we've got to look at this in terms of what is right for also our citizens and for our friends who pay tuition to come to these schools. So if, that we have a sliding policy. Yes.
Most of the policy I see is related to the student, but nothing about that third party who's bringing the student in contact with us. In terms of how much they're charging, all that transparency needs to, we should be able to ask those questions from those companies. Because you're saying 12 to 15, my understanding.
That was just what someone said. I have no idea
From
if that's
a country
correct.
like India and China is about $15,000 to $20,000 they can charge. It's pretty lucrative, as I was telling Dr. Brennan. Going to high school in the United States, basically you have a lot more easier to get into the U.S. universities compared to you applying from your home countries. So it's an investment for parents to send their kids. And on top of that, their cultural assimilation in high school is much more smoother than in college level. So it helps our students, it helps those students, but there's a lot more money involved, and I hope we are not being used by these companies.
And they are only here for 1 year. And I've heard from host families that said it was just the best year for them, the investment with the students, and their families that do it over and over again because they really enjoy. They travel to the country where their students from. So, from the students' point of view, it's a very positive experience. But I hear what you're saying in terms of the cost.
Do you know when, even prior to 10 years, what they were paying Lynchburg? Do you know what the amount was?
They were paying whatever a student paid to attend Lynchburg City Schools when you were not a student.
So just the same as somebody from Benton
Maybe
County?
at that point it might have been
3,500.
14. It might have been 12 at that point.
Right.
I mean, it was 10 years ago.
Right.
But, and if I remember correctly, it went from the company to the finance office. It didn't go to the schools. It went down to where all tuition money goes.
So my guess is if we say to the company, this is what it's gonna cost, that in turn, that will be put on the child and their family.
Or they'll place
Added.
them somewhere where
Exactly.
they won't charge them.
Right.
See, the other issue is host family is one piece, but tomorrow, suppose Randolph College or the University of Lynchburg decides to have a dual degree program, and they enroll international students in their program. So in dual degree, you know, they channel them through our high schools. So although they are not citizens, they don't have residential property, but they are within the city limits. So what kind of fees will they be paying or will be charging them? You see what I'm saying? So it's a commercial entity. It's not a commercial, it's a non-profit entity in city limits. And just like Mary Baldwin has a dual degree program. They call a program for exceptionally gifted, PAC program.
Do those students pay in-state or out-of-state
The
tuition?
private schools have one flat tuition.
That's right.
Private students, private schools, they just give you scholarship / discount. And so this, my hope is when we change this policy or modify or adopt it, we throw a bigger net.
Right.
You know, in terms of looking at, looking Dr. Everson, but so that we don't have to come back in 2-3 years and revise it again. But there's no doubt that exchange students bring a lot more value in terms of diversity, in terms of, you know, cultural exchange they bring for our students. I see that at my school every day.
So from here, do we want to get the information from the companies that we're using on their fees and?
I don't know that I can regulate that. There are about, right now I have one, but there are upwards to 40 different companies that might.
You had his hand, but it's not a question of regulation, it's just sharing the information.
Dr. Ms. Darby?
I'm missing the point of why we need to worry about how much a company charges to provide the service. That doesn't really, in my opinion, that doesn't really concern us. What concerns us is, should these students be required to pay the tuition that any other student from a local county or another location would be required to pay? And I think that's the issue at hand.
Yes.
And I would agree that is something that we should require. Because if we're going to require it from a student coming from, say, Bedford County, why would we not require that same from a student coming from China? I think that I agree there is a huge benefit to our school system with the diversity, but I also think that there is a certain financial responsibility that foreign exchange students have for the privilege of attending LCS. So I think that the policy change for me comes down to saying that we're going to charge tuition to all foreign exchange students.
And if I
Dr. Coleman.
spoken on this issue, I'm very interested, Madam Chair, in you at some point sharing your thoughts about this. I've served as a host family in the past, but it was for a private school that was engaged in the foreign exchange piece. And so for the reasons, I don't need to reiterate that. I totally agree about the value they bring. But I think that the concern, maybe to Atu's question, agreeing with Derek, is are these companies overpricing and not properly distributing where it should be that the school division will not go without?
But see, my question about disclosure is more on against the argument that we're putting unnecessary burden on the students when we enforce, whether it's a policy in place that you're out of county, everybody else is paying, why don't you pay? Because those are the emails we've been getting. So these kids are already paying a significant amount of money to a provider. And since we are not charging directly from the student, we are charging from the provider, right? The cash to us was coming from the company, not from the student. It was channeled through the company.
We're not getting anything.
No, but whatever, supposed to be through the company, not from the student. So when the cash is coming through the company, then company's charge comes in light. How much have they charged at the front end, and what portion of that is coming to us?
Dr. Nellis?
Well, I was gonna say, my comments along that same lines, it seems is the issue that the agreement with these companies isn't being adhered to, or?
We don't have an agreement.
I'm just, so there is no memorandum of agreement that's in place for these, was there 10 years ago?
I don't remember.
And how was that, I guess, how were the funds funneled to LCS at that point?
It seems it was paid from the company to LCS.
So then where the host family comes in picture, then the transaction is between us and the company.
If we have an agreement, yes.
Yeah, I mean, again, I go back, I don't think that we need to concern ourselves with finding out what the host company is charging these students. But I do think that the tuition needs to be paid by this host company. I think that's really where the policy should lie, not us chasing what the value of that company is.
Wait a minute. Sorry.
The other part of that is many of the host families it's believed that if they're with them and they're a resident of Lynchburg now, that they shouldn't have to pay because they're actually in someone's home and they are part. But I am in agreement with you. That's what I thought from the very first time. But that's one of the rationales. So we have to look at it like that. If they're in the host family's home and they're like another child, and they're a resident of the city now for that year or whatever, then should they have to pay? And then the other one was, are we adding more burdens to the student? Wasn't that just
in terms
more
of
financial
extra
burden?
fees?
Yes.
And I'm worried how promising Lynchburg's going to look to people if there's another fee. When you're saying it doesn't matter what these companies charge, I think it does, because if we're adding, out of county, out of city is $3,500 to come. So that's adding that company's going to add it to that child, I'm sure. If they haven't been paying it, I doubt they're all going to say, okay, we'll give y'all the three. I think we just need to come to an agreement on if, like Sharon said, they'd even pay if they're, I've got a little bit of problem with that. If they're living in Lynchburg with a family that's in district and saying they have to pay. I understand the out of district.
Sharon?
I think one of the major problems is that we've had a policy that we haven't been adhering to.
Mm-hmm.
And now people have not been paying for the significant period of time, and we haven't been able to backtrack exactly what happened. So, but that was not one of the discussions. I think that was kind of taken off the table, but I think that is something to be placed on the table, because you have to look at, I was talking in the meeting, it's just a good thing that we've waived a lot of fees that our students have had for lunches, for past due, because how can we say to other students come free for this significant amount of money, and we're holding $25 over other kids' heads? So that's not.
Dr. Sinha?
But we did waive those fees.
If these kids, as part of their itemized bill with this service, think that they have paid tuition, and that tuition didn't come to us, that's a problem too.
It is.
Regardless of our
And they may
policy.
have.
And they may have, and we've just not collected it. So, yeah, we need to make clear when we collect it and how we collect it.
Dr. Gupta?
You said people are not paying, but what I'm hearing is the company is not paying.
That's true.
And
Right, I
these
shouldn't say
companies'
this. It's not
business
the
model
students, it's the
is
company.
basically to provide these kids free accommodation, free education, and charge them money. So we are part of that triangle. So if they do something wrong, we are live connected with them. So it's important that how much fees they are charging to their students is transparent to the host family as well as to the school district. Because if host family is duped into providing out of their goodness of their heart all the meals, although the student has been charged at the front end, telling them this is part of your accommodation, this charge is for your meals, although they know that will be free. You see where I'm going?
Dr. Nellis?
Do we know if, we always go to this, what does other surrounding counties or school divisions do? Do we know?
They don't charge, they just place. So it depends on where host families are. Kids get to go to schools. My understanding is that EC Glass is highly rated, so
Right.
kids want to come here, as a couple other schools around the area too.
Ms. Darby?
I mean, again, I keep going back to the same piece. I think it's unfair to burden our administration to track down how these companies operate their business. I think it's up to their parents to ensure that the tuition is paid through whatever that they pay. But I also question the piece about if their host family is a resident in the city of Lynchburg. If we're saying then, if you are placed in a host family in the city of Lynchburg, you pay no tuition, that in itself is establishing a loophole. If I were a company and I'm trying to place students, I'm going to place them all in Lynchburg City Schools because, they're not going to be charged, and I'm going to get the quality, LCS education. So.
But they would have been doing that, and they haven't. I don't think, that doesn't concern me because she just said other counties are not charging.
So this policy as written, or as proposed, aligns with the current practice, which is not to charge the company any fees or charge the student foreign exchange student tuition, assuming they reside in the city.
Correct, assuming that's a big one of where they are, yes.
So that's all this current draft does. That's all.
And then we had to establish the other pieces of it. Are we doing a processing fee? Are we gonna let administration pick the companies and the out-of-district and district host families, which one? And if we're gonna charge tuition, it doesn't matter if you're in district or out of district. I mean, that's not gonna make, they'll take that away and that's null and void at that point.
I know we are SAVIS compliant, certified, so do we process visas in district or the company does it for them? For DS 2019, we don't do anything.
We don't do anything. With this process, we're actually on the back end of it. So the kids, wherever they are, have done an application, have done their vetted. The companies have been approved by the State Department. All of that happens. The field service person works to find a host family. It's great, wonderful, and then it's all pretty much worked out. And then they come to us with the paperwork and say, can they come to your school? So much of the work, and in this case that prompted it, the child was on hold while we waited to try to figure out how do we manage this? What are we doing? Because we haven't collected any tuition. To my knowledge, we don't have any F1 immigration students for which this policy speaks about F1. And many of these companies were saying, but we're not sending you F1 kids, we're sending you J1 kids. And J1 programs are approved by the Department of State, and there's a whole separate vetting process, and boom, boom, boom. So at the point where we got into this and knowing that there was upwards to at least 40 or more companies, and we had not collected tuition from anyone to my knowledge. I mean, we looked, could not
At least
find
10 years.
find anything. So our first question was, you know, let's look at the experience. So the cultural piece and what they bring, what they learn is a good experience for not only the student, the host family, but also for our kids, that interaction. Then the second thing was, is this a moneymaker? And I'm like, we haven't made any money on this, so it's clearly not a moneymaker. I'm not losing any money. I'm just trying to clean up a process. The third piece was, well, our internal procedures, and at least with the one company, the person who signs off on the yes, they can come to our school did not necessarily have to be me. As a matter of fact, I did not know that we had 10 students by the way that they could just go to the high schools and get a sign off. So we've changed that. That's not happening anymore. They're coming from high schools to me, so we're on the same page. The other thing is, you know, when I saw the company, the first thing I did was look and see, are they on the State Department? Are they really who they say they are? Because you just don't know nowadays, and I don't want to get us caught. So my original thing was, all right, we'll have what I call a registration with Lynchburg City Schools fee. So if you're the brand new company, we haven't done business with you, register with us. There's a fee for that, so somebody can manage the paperwork. Who's your field service rep? Who's our contact person? Are you really, you know, certified by the Department of State? And then sign our MOU, which really talks about the kids have to follow our procedures. And there were some questions about whether or not do they pay for an AP test or don't they? What's free, what's not free? Can they play sports or not? You know, well, how does that work? So all of that would be spelled out in an MOU that we would sign that says, here's our agreement with working with this company, and anyone you send to us will follow these rules. That gives us an in and an out should we work with a company that doesn't do or doesn't meet our standards. We can just say, hey, we tried it with, you know, Edwards Company. We don't like that anymore, and Edwards is out. So that was where the fee came in. It's more of the registration processing, getting it all together fee. But we weren't making money off children. We weren't interested in becoming a money maker for children. And I certainly did not want to duplicate efforts of the department and start regulating the business practices of these companies. I don't want to get into that. So that's what the policy just kind of speaks to.
Knowing that they're coming in high school, let's take a step back. How much is your unutilized capacity at high school level?
What do you mean, spaces available?
Yes.
Depends on courses.
On average, for last year.
I couldn't even guess that.
10%, 15%.
I couldn't even guess.
It's possible to estimate that because it is by course. So
Yeah.
If you come in and take any
Some courses are full.
you can't get somewhere else.
The reason is you're bringing in these students where you have a choice to say no, and you don't have any seats, so you're denying admissions to somebody. Space. Are you taking space away from somebody who could have gone to school?
We've asked that question. Spaces taken up with different programs, and I think the answer was no. They really kind of looked at that, and it doesn't seem like anybody was delayed or not able to do what they wanted to do because of this. But there's always a chance, but it didn't just, right, Dr. Evans, didn't appear to be.
And didn't we say 10 at each high school?
10
is
was
the
our
number. It's
limit,
as
which
much-
we would have
as many
to,
as they'll
we would
take.
spell out in the MOU right now. Right now we have 5 that are.
Right.
And 0.
And the
5 at
next,
Glass and 0 at Heritage right
the
now.
next round of applicants are November, December
Yeah,
of
they
this
usually-
year is when they start coming in for next year. So we need to have something in place that we're gonna follow and can stay for years.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? So what's the will of the board with this?
What is the recommend?
We had 3 questions. Now
Yes.
now we have a bigger
Well,
question.
well,
about the tuition.
I think if you answer your questions, that will help guide the language here. Because as written, any kid who comes through a reputable company that registers with us, pays a registration fee, can come here without any additional charge. Whether they, the way this is written, whether they live in Lynchburg City or in the counties. So this is the loosest version. If you want to tighten it, then we'll have to add language to it that says, you know, whether or not that second italicized paragraph is for Lynchburg City residents and then, or
host family residents and non-resident host families
I
have
see.
a different paragraph that may say
I see.
a non-resident family, we're not going to, do any of that, but you have to pay the same tuition you would pay for your own children who live in Campbell County that would come here. That's one of the questions that you would have to ask. And as far as the fee is concerned, I think that was one of the ones we were like, is this a moneymaker? And it really wasn't. So we were looking at somewhere between $500 and $1,000 to register your one-time fee. And then, of course, that gives us the ability to evaluate our relationship with the individual companies.
So after this discussion, what I'm hearing is that you want each of us to answer those 3 questions and send them to you all.
That'd be great.
So you all have the 3 questions, and you just need to respond to them, and then you all
I'll
will.
send them out again.
Okay,
to-
Ms. Carter, sorry.
Does everyone feel like they have enough information, or do
Well,
they want?
yeah.
The other one is, who is taking on this responsibility? Because it's a lot.
It's a lot.
So who, is this a separate, no one has a separate job. Whose
New
job
guy.
is being added?
New guy. Well, the way that I worked it out right now is the conversations. This one company has a field service person who I've talked to. The 2 guidance directors have spoken with. The high school principals have. So the way that we process the 5 that we have right now is the company does all the work with the host families, the training, we are not involved in that, nor do we want to get in the business of that. At the point where they come to register at the schools and say, hey, we have these kids, sometimes it's 2 kids in one host family, that we would like to participate in your program. And at that point, our guidance department will vet and see whether or not, let's say they want to go into AP Spanish, if there's room in there, can we do this, can we do that? And if they feel like we can accommodate the kid, the guidance department and the high school principal, and I've even told Bryn that you might have to change your form because they sign on the bottom of the form and send the form to me. And I'm the actual one that fills out the form, and we keep a copy. We make sure finance gets it so that we get the proper count of our kids because they are counted, and I want to make sure that we know who they are. And we keep that on record at downtown and give a copy back to the schools. So we process the 5 that we did that way right now. If there were a registration fee, then at the point when those forms come in, is this a company we're already doing business with who's already paid the registration fee? If not, then that company has to be vetted. So I think Forte is the name of another one that we may have done business with in the past, but I don't have any students right now. So we would vet that process, and that's where this fee would kick in for that.
So are they, the one you're dealing with now, is that company okay with the fee?
Haven't had that.
This will be from
For-
here
yeah,
out,
we
after
we
these
kind of
5,
grandfather the
we
kids
just
right
let
now
them
because they
go.
were put in the middle of this discussion.
Yeah.
They are aware that that's one of the proposals that we're looking to go for.
And when you say it's not a moneymaker, you're not talking about the tuition we can gain. You're talking about
I'm talking
the
about
fee?
what the practice we've had. Like, was I making money off this in the past, and am I losing, by not doing it? So.
Can I say one thing? I do think when you're talking about it is 10 students at 2 schools. It's not going to me, be a moneymaker, but I, without a doubt, think it's invaluable having foreign exchange students here in school with you and with host families. I think it outweighs. I just think it's an incredible experience for our kids. So I'm just putting that out there.
So the policy specifically says F1, but we have had foreign students who come in who are more mature and they have kids going into the Lynchburg City school system. So the kids are on F2 visa. So I'm assuming if they live within the city limits, they can enroll in the city school systems. And there'll be no fee from them because they live in the city. Am I correct in assuming?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Just a question for
Yes.
clarification. Why would we make a distinction on what type of visa? If it's a type that allows them to do this according to State Department, what does that matter to us?
The state actually has different distinctions between them. Like, for example, they regulate a J1 visa kid is not allowed to drive, can't have a job. There's a whole bunch of regulations that come with
participating in that type of visa program versus the F1 visa program?
F1 is for, I'm the PDSO for my school, and an RO, which a responsible officer is for J1, and PDSO and DSO is for F1. So F1, you can stay here forever, and once you finish a degree, you're allowed to work off campus for a year. Where J1, you have to go back to your country and stay at least 2 years back to your home before you are allowed to come back.
But for our purposes, we wouldn't enforce that. They're just coming to our schools, right?
Enforce what, the rule?
Yeah, whether or not they're allowed to drive, or whether or not how long
But
they
they
stay
will
in the
not give them a
country.
license.
Yeah, they have, that's
on them,
right. the
Correct. That's
company.
why I'm saying, from our point of view, a student attending, what difference does it make?
It doesn't, except if you take out the two italicized paragraphs. Our existing policy says foreign students in an F1, we called out F1.
Yeah.
So when I was talking to the company, they're like, no, we're J1s. And
That's
I'm
why I'm
like,
saying maybe we don't need to make that distinction and just say any foreign exchange student, assuming they adhere to all the requirements of their visa status, may attend.
Because Dr. Gupta.
It's important because then somebody can come on a tourist visa, B1, and just overstay and say I'm a tourist and I can here for 6 months and I can enroll in your
still
school.
a tourist, yeah.
Legally, they are not allowed to enroll in the school. So I think F1, J1 it needs to be clearly in there. So the purpose is clear. Their intent coming to the United States.
Madam Chair, we're going to say about usual process, sharing with you or sharing with the work group.
Share it with.
Share with the work group. Okay. All right.
Okay, that moves us to additional items. And Dr. Copeland, you had something about safe schools that you wanted to.
Good evening, everyone. Virginia Code Chapter 22.1 and Section 279.8 requires that every year our schools update their crisis management plans. The additional verbiage in that section of the code is that the school board shall annually review the plans, and that I'm responsible for certifying the plans by the end of August that you have reviewed them. So here is your review copy. You will notice that this year they're all numbered. I know who's getting what number.
So they will be returned.
These are confidential documents. Please do not post them on the internet, share them with any of your friends. And if you could bring back the disc at the board meeting in September. One of the things that we did is that we standardized across the division. So Ms. Saunders and I worked to develop a template so that everybody could go in and just put their school-specific stuff. So you should see that for all of them except for Laurel. Laurel is not a Lynchburg City Schools entity, and they decided to stay with their old format. So these are your review copies. I will remind you a day or two before the board meeting to bring them at the next board meeting, and then we're done. We moved up our timelines. Normally we would wait until like this week to do it because of when board meetings hit and everything else. We actually required it the Friday before school opened. So that's where we're at, and then we turn around. Once I get the copies back from you, then I share with the police chief, the fire chief, the emergency operations center, and other entities that are involved in emergency management so that they have them for the year should they ever need them. So, thank you.
Now, any other comments from anybody? That moves us to the notice of closed meeting as permitted by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1 to discuss the performance and salary of the superintendent. Do we have a motion to?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Dr. Coleman, Mrs. Carter, any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay. We're now going into closed meeting. And we're going to stay here.